This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome back, everybody, to the X-Cast. As ever, the truth is in here. And welcome back to our special Fight the Future Minute podcast series. I'm Carl Sweeney, today's host, and you are listening to our coverage of minute 105 of the film, which begins with Mulder and Scully continuing to flee from the collapsing ice. But this minute ends, though, with them both on the ground as Mulder looks on at the risen UFO. And to discuss this minute, I'm joined once again by Marlene Stemme. Hey, Marlene.
Hey, Carl.
It's, good to be back for minute 105. So let me just outline what happens in this one just quickly, and then we can talk about the specifics. So, yeah, as I said, they try to outrun the collapsing surface in this one, don't they? They drop, off screen for a few seconds. The spacecraft rises. It's very big. And Mulder sees it, of course, and he'll continue to see it into the next minute. That's basically what happens. So what did you think of this one, Marlene?
I think that it's, the excitement kind of started a couple minutes before, and then they get to the surface in the last minute. But this is where it really gets real. They're kind of running away, or they are running away as the ice is kind of breaking behind them. So I think this is sort of the climax of the rescue sequence. It's exciting. It's got a lot of sensory detail, so I really enjoy it.
I mean, in terms of sensory detail, I'm not sure if this is what you're thinking about, but as I said, that spacecraft is very, very big, isn't it? And it feels much bigger to me than like the UFOs we traditionally see on the show. I suppose maybe that's apt in the sense that, the big screen canvas, the climax of a big kind of action type movie kind of thing. But yeah, what did you make of the spaceship?
Of the spaceship, I agree with you. I think it's by far just that, we saw some of the scope of it underground, but we didn't quite know what we were looking at, in the previous minutes. Mm-hmm. And then seeing it as it's kind of, rising in the sky, you realize just the magnitude, I guess, of whatever was going on. And also thinking, all those things that Mulder saw and all those people that were in there are still in there. And he's, looking up, I believe it's in this minute, when he's kind of looking up and seeing this massive ship and the green lights and so forth, kind of like the light that he had seen up close when he was in the ship. And also just the way the ice is breaking even before the ship, emerges, just the ice dropping away from it, there's something tremendous that's going on.
Yeah.
And I was going to mention as well that I'm not sure that when I first saw this movie, I'm not sure that I understood at the time that the ice had been collapsing because the ship was leaving. I mean, I knew once it was flying over them that's what was going on. But I think I was just too engrossed in Mulder and Scully's plight and in the icy landscape and all of that, like them getting away, to think about the implications of the ship leaving. So that was, seeing it again and going over this is kind of, I pick up on things that I probably should have noticed and understood the first time.
Well, I understand that because I think, it's very easy to get kind of swept up in the spectacle, I suppose. Mm-hmm. So I understand that. I thought it was interesting. I thought Mulder, in this particular minute, he seems kind of awestruck, I think, by the spaceship. And then his expression changes in the next one, which we'll come on to.
Yeah.
But I liked that. Just a couple of things I've picked up on the commentary then. So I think I mentioned in the previous minute, but they actually mentioned it on the commentary for this one where they talk about how there was going to be something a bit more elaborate with a big wall of ice coming down on them or outrunning it or something. It's still pretty spectacular as is, I think. Chris Carter expressed some amazement that this whole sequence worked. I guess, that they overcame some of the challenges that were posed to them. He talked about how things like powdered sugar were used in some capacity. I'm not entirely sure what he meant by that, but that's kind of an interesting thought, I think.
Yeah.
Rob Bowman talked a bit about some of those challenges, though, like snow texture, snow density, making things appear realistic, and I think scale posed some issues with just the various things they're working with, like composites and CG and so on. And there was some kind of mirth on the commentary in the sense that, I can't remember who threw this comment in, but somebody said, of course Scully's unconscious, for the sighting of the UFO. Which is kind of semi-conscious, actually, but like, of course was the idea. Mm-hmm. So what have you picked up, Marlene? You've got this book that you've been looking at. Anything in there about this?
So this is from the Making of the X-Files Fight the Future, which I enjoyed revisiting for this. I hadn't looked at it probably in years, but in the book, they discuss not only how they filmed this on a soundstage and then did a composite for the special effects and so forth, but which sounds like it would be more comfortable, but in reality, it doesn't sound from the description that it was, because they talk about the low temperature that they had to keep the set. I think it was like somewhere in the 40s, which doesn't sound that bad, but then David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson had to keep doing the running sequence over and over again across the snow, like for days, it said. And, it's just a short sequence, but they're running and they're falling and sliding around and all of that. And then also, it said that the crew members would throw snowballs near the actors' heads to simulate the havoc being wreaked on the snow plane, so that, I guess, when they did the special effects, it would actually correspond to their performances and to what the rest of the vibe of the scene was. And then even worse, they say that buckets of cold water were also poured on them periodically to make the characters look suitably cold and wet. So it's, the little things, I guess, that you have to do, but I can't imagine that going on for days would have been extremely pleasant. But it works.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I think the real joy of performing these parts must be, or I might be wrong here, but I think it must be getting your teeth stuck into some kind of challenging dialogue, and some interesting back and forth and so on. I think having to do the same kind of physical action again and again and again, I'm not as convinced that's as fulfilling for an actor. I don't know. I can imagine that gets a bit monotonous and tiresome. So I guess I feel for David and Gillian. I suppose that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I definitely do too. And I wondered if doing that was, I'm sure they got tired of it, but it's like, oh, I can't wait to get out of this. Or if it also was one of those things that they would look back on with fondness. It's like a bonding time. Like, oh, remember that time we had to have water poured on us for days. So this is definitely interesting. And then in some of the photos that they have in this book of the filming of that sequence, they have them, it looks like they are running across ice, and it's, I think, real ice with like a dusting of other things and, machine ice put on top of that. It says real chipped ice generated by ice makers, and then it's like fired onto the platform between takes to add the sort of layer of ice with the fake snow, and maybe the sugar had something to do with that as well. But then in this, you have that going on the ground, and you have the geysers that are actually coming up, and then you have just a wall of the green screen behind them. So I don't know. I think that's it's fun to see how it's filmed. And to me, it doesn't take away from the experience of watching that. No,
I don't think it does either. Yeah, I agree. What do you make quickly? And I guess we can kind of discuss this further in the next minute as well, perhaps, because it kind of develops. But like I said, there's this, somebody chucks in the comment of course Scully doesn't see, or of course Scully's unconscious. Right. And that's one of the things you often hear about the series, isn't it, from people who are maybe less versed in it, or just kind of have a casual idea of what it is that she's always one step behind, or, she never sees the phenomenon. What's your thoughts on that? Do you have any qualms about that kind of... I don't think it happens as often as people think it does, to be honest, but what do you think?
I agree with you. I think it doesn't happen as often as people think, but it happens regularly enough that it is a thing for sure. But I think it doesn't happen in an unjustified way as often as people think. And I think sometimes I'll hear comments from fans or viewers that talk about like, oh, Scully didn't see this again. And it might be something that's a legitimate situation in which she wouldn't. Because I don't think she would be as apt or as in as many situations just naturally to not see something. Like Mulder would be much more likely to see that. And I think it makes sense a lot more than we think it does, but there are enough occasions when it is sort of, like silly or a funny trope of the show that I think we're seeing it more than we do. Mm-hmm. And in this one, I would say that to me, it makes sense. I mean, it's another reason to have that come up, but at the same time, I think that it's completely plausible that she's collapsed onto the ice, and is not looking upward like Mulder is, because she's just, she already lost consciousness once and had to be revived. So I don't think that would necessarily be a big priority for her to be, to see. I don't think she's seeing her environment, and I think that that's something that sort of comes up a couple minutes later as well when she really realizes what's going on. But I think at this point, she's probably not even able to understand what's happening. And that, if you don't mind, that reminded me of one other thing that I remember reading in the book that I guess would be appropriate to bring up here in terms of suffering on set, which was that it said Gillian Anderson had to have her face planted in the ice for so long that her face was going numb from long and repeated exposure to the ice. So it makes sense that she did not see the ship.
I think we'll come on to this more because there's a bit of a debate around. I'll just tee it up now. There's a debate, isn't there, about whether she saw it, the closed captions, what they say, and so on. We'll get into that on minute 106, I think.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to round off this minute, I think, with a few more facts about Antarctica from livescience.com. Let's see. What do you think the area of Antarctica is in square miles, Marlene, to the nearest million?
Oh, goodness. I have no idea. My sense of distance is so impoverished.
No, I wouldn't know either. If I told you it's 1.5 times the size of the United States, would that help?
I was going to say that's about what I would estimate it to be. But I still,
And this is okay. So, including its islands and attached floating plains of ice, Antarctica has an area of about 5.4 million square miles, or 14 million square kilometers. I mentioned Lake Vostok, I think, on the last minute. I think that's where that temperature I mentioned. That was Vostok Station, is what I said. But yeah, there's a Lake Vostok hiding under the Antarctic ice. It's a pristine freshwater lake buried beneath 2.5 miles of solid ice. It's about the size of Lake Ontario. And it's the largest of the more than 200 liquid lakes strewn around the continent under the ice. Antarctica has one of the longest mountain ranges on Earth. The Transantarctic Mountains divide the continent into east and west sections. And that mountain range is 2,175 miles long. And just finally, I guess, the existence of Antarctica was completely unknown until the continent was first spotted in 1820. It wasn't until 20 years later that it was confirmed to be a continent and not just a group of islands. I mean, I was going to say, but I think it might have been interesting to live through kind of historical periods where land masses were being discovered and so on. But I think unless you were one of the discoverers, I'm not sure how long it took for that information to kind of work its way through to the ordinary populace, But I kind of like the idea of it anyway.
Yeah, it reminds me of the maps that you see, the old kind of, I don't know if they're mariners maps or just old maps or what they are, where they would have monsters. Sort of, right, exactly. The here be monsters and sort of speculated lands and so forth. Yeah. I like that idea.
I did too. Oh, I missed one actually. Okay, so finally, Antarctica is home to Mount Erebus, the southernmost active volcano on the planet, and home to Earth's only long-lived lava lakes. So I guess I never really put volcano and Antarctica together, but it turns out I was wrong. So that's fascinating, I think.
That is very fascinating.
All right, Marlene, unless you have anything else on minute 105, we're just about done here, I think.
I don't think I do. I think anything that I had probably would be a segue into our next minute.
Okay, so yeah, that's a nice way to say that we'll be back for minute 106 then, as this sequence continues. So I'm looking forward to that. Listeners, you can find us in all the usual places online in the meantime, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. But until our next minute, remember, as always, trust no one.
Elsewhere on We Made This. The giddy carousel of pop.
So there's just one thing we need to know. Where were you on the 13th of July 1985?
I definitely watched the whole of Live Aid, sat 2 inches away from the telly. My mum and my stepdad and my stepsister coming in and out and trying to prise me away from the telly and not really managing.
I was in Wembley. I took a day off work. They didn't believe I was going. I had to show them the ticket.
Went to a dog show at Malvern. And saw Auntie Sandra and Uncle Jeff.
I was there. Me and a school friend went. My mum and dad drove us down. They had a day in London. We went to the concert.
The Movie Palace.
So, Carl, what is White Heat about for you?
For me, it's about where the gangster genre is at this point in time. And I think one of the interesting things to look at with gangster films is always how do they take the temperature of the time that they're made? So I suppose it comes at a very interesting time in terms of globally, doesn't it? You had the proclamation of the People's Republic of China, you had the Soviet Union testing the atomic bomb, stuff like that, So there's something interesting about this film, which ends with this big explosion at the chemical factory, which comes along at this time of nuclear tension.
Between the Notes.
I think it's important to remember throughout the 1990s into the early 2000s, there were loads and loads of chill-out albums that were released, like repeatedly. They were all over the place. My dad always used to collect those. He used to buy them. And Morricone was always on those, which is another sign of how remarkable he was. He could cross over into the mainstream populist sphere, and the score for The Mission was always on those albums, particularly Gabriel's oboe, which is an interesting story. I looked this up. So Jeremy Irons plays the character of Gabriel in the movie, and he performs the oboe. Well, he mimes playing the oboe in the film, and then that's obviously overdubbed with the music.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.